Now the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Along with Jim Garrity of National Review, I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, bad, crazy martinis for you as usual. We've got a main good martini today, and we'll have a little bit of a good martini leading into it. Jim, there was so much concern about terrorist attacks at the Winter Olympics. They're done. There were no attacks, so salute to all the security professionals there. It was a little dicey going in, but in the end, everyone was kept safe except for Bob Costas' eyes. And
acceptable collateral damage, Greg. We accept those casualties.
Unless you're Bob Costas, I guess. But the real good martini was what was happening in neighboring Ukraine, and it'll be interesting to see what Vladimir Putin does here now that he can turn his full attention to what's happened there. But in a very swift series of events, we talked about it briefly last week, but just in the last couple of days, we saw the Viktor Yanukovych administration, first of all, relenting on some crackdown procedures. Then they agreed to early elections. Next thing you know, he's out of town. The presidential administration buildings are occupied by the protesters. Now they've got a warrant out for mass murder on Yanukovych, and we salute the determination of the protesters, knowing that those earlier promises probably weren't going to be honored. You saw Republicans and Democrats on the Sunday morning shows talking about how they're hoping true democracy comes to the Ukraine. It's still a deeply divided country, and we hope there's not a civil war. But, Jim, we love to see people yearning for freedom and looking like they're making progress in getting it.
By no means is Ukraine out of the woods, but this was a good series of developments. You know, just by looking at the statue of Lenin that has come down from Kiev and is being carted away to the junkyard. Look, I understand that sometimes this can seem like a murky situation. Yanukovych was actually elected. However, the problem is once elected, he started acting in a rather dictatorial manner, and the understanding is that he's the one who ordered the police to start shooting at protesters, which is not how things are supposed to function in a democracy. And so, obviously, it looks very clear that he was a close ally with Russia and was going to orient the entire country in that direction. In Ukraine, large number of Ukrainians who did not agree with that, who did not like the direction their country was going in. They stood up and after a really intense period of violence in the center of Kiev, it now appears that the president is now hiding somewhere in the country. The parliament is now in charge. They're appointing a interim leader, and they're going to have new elections in May. Again, not out of the woods yet, but this is one where we've seen so many uprisings get squashed in places like Iran. We go back to Tiananmen Square, areas where the autocrats have come in and taken control. And, when people get out and protest, they like to believe that they can unify the country. And in this case, what was fantastic here is eventually the security services said, we're not shooting people anymore. And that ultimately was the end of this. I give a smidgen of praise to John Kerry. He's saying the right things. Apparently reached out to Russia twice this weekend and said, hey, you guys stay out of this. Now, we'll see if they're actually backing up that rhetoric with anything. But nonetheless, the Obama administration is saying the right things. We'll have to see if this policy advances and if we really do what we can to help support the Ukrainians as they try to determine their own future and to not be a pawn of Putin running things from Moscow.
You know when you've gone too far as a president is when one of your concessions to protesters is, okay, we'll go back to the old Constitution.
Yeah.
For the mild praise we just gave the Obama administration, let's move on to the bad martini, because here's the news we got this morning. It's breaking all over the place. Martha McCallum over at Fox News sums it up pretty well.
Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is expected to recommend some deep budget cuts to our armed forces. Pentagon slashing the number of troops to less than 500,000. That is a drop of at least 120,000 military members since its peak post 9/11. The cuts will also limit pay raises for the military, including one-year pay increase freeze for top brass, while cutting subsidies for military-based grocery stores and halting production on an entire class of Air Force attack jets.
So that commissary story we did a while ago in the Crazy Martini unfortunately turns out to be true. Here's more analysis. This is from CNN's Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr. If this doesn't concern you a little bit, you might need to pay a little better attention.
Things like pay, health care for veterans could be impacted. That will be very controversial. But what about the risk to national security? The Obama administration's view is Iraq and Afghanistan are over. There's no real scenario in the foreseeable future for another major land war. If something breaks out, they will deal with it with that advanced technology. That is their hope.
There you go, Jim. So we're just going to assume that nothing that big will ever be needed again, so we'll just won't have it.
They seem very confident that we're not going to have a terrible military conflict in the near future. Certainly we're hoping we don't, but with enough trouble spots around the world, the idea of us not needing to project force anywhere doesn't necessarily seem like a safe bet. And, it's an unfortunate cycle in American history that we complete a war, and there are obviously quite a few folks who would say that Iraq is done, but now the al-Qaeda flag was flying from places like Fallujah. It's not like the Taliban and the extremists have really been defeated in Afghanistan. It's more a matter of we're just tired of being engaged in that country. And so we kind of just hope, okay, well, we're going to leave and hope that everything turns out for the best. And that is not a guarantee. There's an old saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. And if you are in a position where you can project a great deal of military force on anybody anywhere in the world, that gives them more than a good reason to pause and perhaps to hesitate before doing anything provocative. We'll see what happens, but you kind of have an ominous feeling in some point in the, either a year from now, 2 years from now, several years from now, some sort of terrible crisis is erupting somewhere else in the world, and we are suddenly having to build our military back up again because of the cuts made now. I mean, the irony is we're looking for a peace dividend when the world really is not at peace.
Jim, hopefully you can help me clarify something here, because one of the Fox News military folks was saying, General Jack Keane, was that this is all still part of sequestration. The military is 19% of the budget, but they're handling 50% of the sequestration cuts. What was the breakdown in the Ryan Murray bill? I thought one of the reasons Republicans got behind that was because they were easing the sequestration on the military. Is that not the case?
A good point there, which is one of the reasons that, so many Republicans voted for something that a lot of budget hawks saw as a fig leaf, if anything, in terms of budget cutting. It would not be surprising to see this administration say, okay, we're going to take it easy on the Pentagon and then turn around, because this is the only area they've ever felt good about, cutting the budget and, acting like, oh, we're really focused on the bottom line. I'm sure we'll end up repaving the White House sidewalk or something like that, and other kinds of money will be spent while the troops aren't getting a pay raise next year.
Yeah, and the commissaries aren't open, which is an important deal in many different bases and on tight budgets for military families. So on to Martini number 3 now, Jim, and a much-needed lighthearted crazy after that kind of depressing second Martini, and that is that Piers Morgan is being shown the door, at least in terms of his own primetime TV show. It was just announced over the weekend that due to his deplorable ratings, that will no longer be a staple in CNN's primetime lineup. Piers Morgan says he's excited to see what other projects he might be able to do with CNN. And one of the things that you noted in the Jolt this morning and that other people are kind of chuckling about is that Piers Morgan and some others are blaming the fact of his poor performance in prime time on the fact that Americans just didn't warm up to a British guy.
Do you know what I say to that, Greg?
What's that?
How dare you? How dare you? How dare you, to use Piers Morgan's favorite arguing technique. He just shrieks that at you repeatedly until you just out of guilt decide to concede that you've done something wrong. As I go down in the Morning Jolt, I mean, there's this fellow named James Bond who Americans have been known to watch a few movies of, and this guy Harry Potter, a couple kids have bought books about him. Down to, I mean, you just go down the Rolling Stones, The Who, The Beatles, it's not Piers Morgan's Britishness. You could do, translate everything he says through an American accent-o-meter. The reaction would be exactly the same. No, he was always a strange choice to be the replacement for Larry King and kind of the anchor of the 9 o'clock time slot in CNN. I suppose you could say he was a good interviewer, but that's not really what he attracted much attention for. And really, let's face it, Larry King, allegedly great interviewer, now employed by the Kremlin over at RT TV, really was master of the softball question. He'd have Bill Clinton on post-impeachment and say, so what's your favorite soup? And really random questions. This was not a Tim Russert cross-examination. So we have this British tabloid journalist who's there, and, no one really objected to the celebrity guest. But, whenever he dipped his toe into the realm of politics, the fact that he's down the line lefty isn't that surprising. What's really kind of striking is he honed in on the gun issue and the Second Amendment. And in his mind, it was insane that America had the Second Amendment and we allowed citizens to own guns. And in this aspect, maybe his British accent played a little bit, in the sense of some outsider telling us how things ought to be. I believe a few weeks ago, Nancy Grace, of all people, just tore him a new one. And all up in hot air and said, I know you're not used to figuring out who to root for in a fight between Piers Morgan and Nancy Grace. But let's just say this is the most deserving fellow that ever be on the side of one of her tirades. Our Charlie Cook put out an offer to debate Piers Morgan anytime, anywhere, any place. Obviously Morgan never took him up on it. And I guess here's the thing, which is that, there's nothing, there are lefties. Then there are lefties who have no interest in engaging in the opposition. And Piers Morgan would periodically say, I can't believe that we allowed the nut jobs in this country to, that's my expert Piers Morgan impression there. And he would just dismiss the idea that there was an opposing viewpoint. Like there was no real interaction, no argument. So as a result of that, folks on the right obviously wanted nothing to do with them, and I don't know if it's all that interesting for the left. Folks on the left were watching MSNBC shrieking about how evil Republicans were. So you end up with this mush. You end up with this generally unappealing kind of sneer approach to it. It's also kind of a strange hybrid to go with that and then to be talking to celebrities about their new movies or other tabloid stories and things like that. It was kind of a strange mix that obviously never gelled. Goodbye, Piers Morgan. If you want to blame anti-British attitudes in the U.S., you can go right ahead. All the kids listening to One Direction will agree with you, too, by the way.
If they really wanted to bottom out the ratings, a nightly debate show between Piers Morgan and Nancy Grace would probably get the job done. I can't imagine anything less popular.
I don't know. If you strongly dislike either one of them, you might go there just rooting for injuries or something. No. My favorite idea, Greg, is that somebody has said that Alec Baldwin has announced he's withdrawing from public life, meaning that he'll still do movies, but he doesn't want to be a public figure anymore. Good luck with that, Alec. But can you imagine if there was some utterly powerless office that we could get Donald Trump and Alec Baldwin to run against each other in? Aren't they just made for each other? Well, that's just perfect. No, you're a huge idiot. No, you're a all of his various homophobic slurs and stuff like that, and going back, it would just kind of create this black hole of celebrity obnoxiousness. It could suck everything else into its maw. So maybe it's not such a good idea, Greg.
If there's $1 in it, Trump will do it.
There you go.
But since Alec Baldwin has retired from public life, I'm guessing he might be reluctant to do so. But he can get in line there with LaBeouf and Bieber, because so far this has been a good year for people deciding to depart the public life. But
Bieber may not have a choice soon.
Jim, have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. And be sure to join us again on Tuesday for the next edition of the 3 Martini Lunch. Have a great day, everyone.